1920s is also a time that we think of prosperity. We've talked about peace already. We're going to talk about prohibition. We're going to talk about prejudice in the different videos. But I want to talk to you about prosperity. 1920s is going to see the rise of commercialism. Commercialism is this idea of promoting the purchase of materials for not just because out of necessity or need or even comfort, but the idea of pushing to buy things to keep up with people, kind of keeping up with the Joneses, playing into advertisement, sort of envy and jealousy. But also the idea of commercialism is sort of you buy things because maybe you're just not as good a person if you don't own fill in the blank. So, and there's a lot of really cool things that come around in the 1920s that are worth buying. For example, automobiles were not invented in the 1920s. They were invented 30 years earlier, but they're finally becoming inexpensive enough that your average American could purchase one. You had not just the Ford Model T, which you can get in any color you wanted to, as long as that color was black. But you also have the invention of General Motors, the Chrysler, Cadillac. Some of these other companies are going to come into existence during this time. Pontiac is going to come into existence during this time. And so those are big purchases. Another thing that's going to come along is the washing machine. Wow, I think how your life would be different without washing machines. And that the washing machine is going to come along. Other things that are going to come along, the radio. Our first mass media device is going to be the radio, and the radios are going to be in so many homes. People would come and they'd listen to radio shows, and they'd all gather around the radio to listen to stories being told that were sponsored by soap companies, and so they were called soap operas. But it wasn't just that. There was things like The Shadow, which was a scary show. Oh, who knows what lurks in the hearts of men? The Shadow. And then there were other shows like Superman and The Lone Ranger. And then they also played music like jazz. And it kind of helps unite America and kind of eliminate some of the sectionalism. But those are expensive purchases. And new clothes, fashions were changing. And, women weren't wearing 20-layer dresses anymore. They were wearing flapper clothes, which take a tenth of the material. All right, but you got to buy them and beads and plastic. Bakelite is being invented, which is an early form of plastic, and mass production. So all of these things going out there to purchase. So what do? You buy them on installment. This prosperity that is being created during the 1920s is actually a prosperity that is built upon debt. We're going to see the invention of credit cards. We're going to see the use of installment plans. Buy now, pay later, pay a little bit more, kind of rent to own sort of things. We're going to see a proliferation of things like this. And it's going to be a time period where people want to buy things. All right. This is also the rise of celebrity culture. This idea that I want to know what Charlie Chaplin is wearing. Ooh, he looks sharp in that particular suit, so I want to dress like Charlie Chaplin. Well, that's expensive. If you want to dress like somebody famous who has a lot more money, you better come up with that money too. So how are you going to do it? Well, you're going to borrow that money. All right. So while it is true, purchasing increases, so does the debt that our country, individuals are holding, is going to increase very quickly as well. And so this prosperity is going to be paid for by debt. It's a false prosperity. What's more is this is a prosperity that doesn't touch everybody. By the mid 1920s, early in the 1920s, all right, the price of cotton is very high. Their price of commodities is high because they were being used for the war. Well, as we dismantled our military, we didn't need as many uniforms. We didn't need as many socks or bandages. And we go through this period where we need a lot of cotton for like the new sheets for like veterans hospitals and stuff. But for the most part, we don't need as much stuff as we once did. And so the price of cotton is going to tank in 1925-ish or so. right? So for farmers, particularly farmers who raise cotton across the South and including Texas, the Great Depression, which is what we're talking on a different week, is actually going to start during the 1920s. What's more is the 1920s prosperity is not going to touch every race group the same. If you're Many Hispanics worked in the fields, and since the price of commodities was going down, then the wages for the people who were picking the cotton or picking the vegetables is also going to go down. And so there's a lot of poverty for those sorts of migrant workers and a lot of abuse that's being heaped on them as well. And and so this prosperity wallet is not being spread evenly. All right, but a lot of people point to the stock market, because much like today, if you hey, look, if the stock market's up, we must be a prosperous country. Well, you can argue whether or not that's true, but certainly during the 1920s, the stock market was on fire, and like it was never going to end. Like every time they were going to go, prices were always going to go up. Which of course, you and I both know that that's impossible. Everything that goes up eventually has to come down. And that's what's going to happen at the end of the decade. But up until then, well, the stock market seemed like it was a sure bet. Everyone was buy, and the prices were going up. The value of companies was going up because people were buying all this stuff on debt, on consignment, using credit cards, using installment plans, things of this nature, and it seemed like it was always going to go up. In fact, people were so sure that it was going to always go up that they would borrow money just so they could invest in the stock market. And then the idea being that you would, when the debt comes due, you would sell off part of your stocks and use that profit then to pay off your debt. And as long as things continue to go up, you might be okay. And banks got in on this too, because banks like to make money, and so they would take people's savings and they would they would use that money to invest in the stock market. Another thing that would happen is that banks, when you go in there and say, listen, I want to buy 100 shares of Sears and Roebuck, because, Sears and Roebuck will be here forever. I need a little sign that says sarcasm. Okay, so Sears and Roebuck will be here forever. Sarcasm. And so, well, then, you know what? All you have to do is put 10% down, and then we just take some of the profits as they come in, which, okay, you know what? So even our stock market is propped up by borrowed money, and sooner or later, the bank always comes calling. The debt always comes due sooner or later. And when it does, it's going to cause we're not going to cause a great war. We're going to go into a Great Depression as our economy, that formerly so red hot, so prosperous, is going to tank. And people are going to be from the top of the world to the bottom of the heap. Massive unemployment, massive suffering because of that. Prosperity is not built on anything that is truly sustainable. Another thing that's going to be pushing some of this prosperity is, again, the new fashions. Women are going to start doing things like they could smoke in public, and so they could show their kneecaps. Oh, the scandal! And so these new French and English fashions and stuff like this, and the fancy cars, those are all going to push that prosperity. But again, the big thing is that it's always going to be on debt. And so that prosperity, much like the peace that I've talked about in another video, isn't quite as prosperous as we think. There's some irony built in here, some situational irony, I think, about where this prosperity really is and how much there really is. So still need to talk about, we've already talked about peace. We're going to talk about prejudice, and we're going to talk about prohibition in different videos. Until then, I'll talk to you later.